Well,
You paid money for this, sir? On purpose?
wow. Come on, seriously, Zoe, what do you think?
Honestly, sir, I think you got robbed.
Robbed? What do you mean?
It's a piece of Feu.
Feu. Okay, she won't be winning any beauty contests anytime soon, but she is solid. A ship like this, be with you to the day you die.
Because it's a death trap.
That's not... You are very much lacking in imagination.
I imagine that's so, sir.
Come on, you haven't even seen most of it. Let me show you the rest. And try to see past what she is and onto what she can be.
What's that, sir?
Freedom is what?
I meant, what's that?
Oh, yeah, just step around that. I think something must have been living in here.
Tune up, level up your fun. Tune up, your quest has now begun. Tune up, we'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up.
All right, we are back. It's been a little bit of a hiatus here at the Tabletop Tune-Up, but I'm your host, Ben Dyer. I'm here with my co-host, Mark Lehman.
Hey, what's going on?
Before we get into today's topic, I wanted to just take a moment and acknowledge we have put a little delay on this. We're changing our schedule up a little, and I think we're going to be producing, Mark, every 2 weeks or so?
Yeah, I think we would like to switch to a every 2 week format, because we got to pay bills and stuff.
Other things are happening in life, and we got to be smart. And frankly, the other thing too is I would hate for us to be kind of, as we've said before, when you're a GM and you got to take breaks from time to time, you want to kind of find the rate at which you've got a lot of that good creative outflow ready to go. So we want to bring you the best stuff, have the most interesting discussions we can come up with.
So Ben, what are we doing today? What are we talking about?
Today is a really fun topic. We're going to talk about lairs, or bases, or headquarters, that place the players hang their hats, the characters call home. That's what we're talking about today.
Lairs are so fun. Like for whatever reason, when I hear like we're gonna have a secret lair in a game, I immediately get thrown back to like my childhood and like all the shows I liked and superhero stuff where they always had these cool, awesome lairs.
All right, I'm going to give you like a kind of a counterpoint. I want you to make the case here. Pitch it to me. Somebody might think, hey, having your players get stuck kind of in one place, that sounds boring. Isn't that kind of average player party going to be kind of globetrotting and running around dimensions and doing all those things and leaving? What do you say to somebody like that who's maybe skeptical?
I said, no, you're boring. You're dumb. No. Then you need to figure out what kind of lair you want for your game. If your players are globetrotting, I mean, Millennium Falcon's a lair, right? That's Han Solo's lair.
Okay.
He's globetrotting.
So part of what we want to do is we want to define this carefully a little bit. A lair can be lots of things. What is valuable about a lair is that it lets your players do all kinds of things with their characters that are hard to do maybe without a lair. And maybe to your point, like you could do some of these things with vehicles, but let's think about some examples here. So for example, one thing it lets players do is they can own this piece of real estate and really kind of have a consistent home. They can have a territory. You and I, when we were talking about this, we talked about how like Batman has his Batcave and that connects him to Gotham City in a certain way. And that's Batman's territory.
And if you're going to have a Batman movie, you sure as heck better have the Batcave. It's almost like a side character. It's like Alfred.
The other thing that's cool is that it gives characters something else to build. A lot of times players will be building their characters' capabilities up. They'll be getting better weapons, or they'll be getting, better skills, or whatever it is they're getting. Giving them one of these things, a lair or a base or headquarters, whatever you want to call it, it gives them a way to build something else up, to build. They've got some wonderful new Bastion rules in the current 2024 edition of the rules.
There's a point in the game too where you want players to be spending their resources, things they've been acquiring, maybe whether that be, gold or, coins or, credits, whatever. You want a place for them to kind of like spend that stuff. And I thought lair is a good place.
Yeah. I mean, real estate's costly.
Well, another thing too, which we could discuss is that layers are kind of a thing that you're doing as a group. Like it's
Mhm.
not an individual thing. Everybody's chipping in on this. The layers should reflect the personality of your party, your group. So it's a fun activity for everybody to get involved in.
So it kind of brings people together a little bit too.
It can.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
absolutely.
One thing that's kind of nice too is a lot of times players over the course of their adventuring, they're going to acquire items. They're going to take prisoners. They're going to do all kinds of stuff that is better served when they've got their own place that they can own, their own four walls, their own defenses, their own alarms, their own phantom zone, whatever it might be. They've got that ability to superintend and manage that stuff on their own so that they can be more confident that things are going to go well for them. Of course, you as the GM know things will not go well for them, but it's nice to give them that illusion.
Yeah. So basically, the idea is that these layers should augment those characters quite a bit. They should let them feel like they're growing. They're growing as a character. And I mean, in a more like capitalistic society, what's a way to show kind of growth is to acquire things, and that could be real estate.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds
good.
silly. It's very primitive, but I think it works on a very basic level. And I think that's why it's in so much pop culture, like superheroes. They all have their layers, but like science fiction, every spaceship that flies around is like a mobile lair.
Yeah.
It tells you a lot about that show.
And you could even think of that as something that's also helping you as a GM launch stories, investigate character backgrounds. You know, we were talking about Batman's Batcave. There's also like Superman's Fortress of Solitude, right? That's a good example of a lair.
And also, like Ben, what does that tell you about Superman? Like,
Yeah, that's
like he needs a place to kind of get away.
well, and also it lets him. What's interesting in those stories is that when Superman needs to get away, he goes to one of two places. He'll either go to the Fortress of Solitude if he kind of needs to connect to his Kryptonian side, or he goes back to the farm with Ma and Pa Kent if he needs to connect to his human side. And so those are both kind of interesting options for him.
Yeah, and like and Batman's has got a very different feel, like what his lair is all about. That's where he goes to run samples, take a look at the evidence he's gathered and look at his giant coin.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about augmenting capabilities before, right? This is something that a good lair will do is it will give you ways to increase your skill with something, get some bonuses, it gives you resources to basically help you do things that you couldn't do if you weren't in your lair.
So Ben, like what to you counts as a lair?
Yeah, this is a good question. So we were talking about Superman a moment ago. Does Clark Kent's apartment count as a lair? And I would say no, it doesn't, because
probably not.
Not really. I mean, it's disposable, right? If he had a different apartment, would it matter? No.
Yeah, there's nothing really uniquely specific about that apartment that would make it a quote lair, I would say. Yeah.
When I think about then what it is that makes a lair, I think it's got to be something that connects you to something about the character background, the character story. It's got to be something that enhances one of those things. It's hard to define because it could also be some other things. You were talking a moment ago about vehicles like the Starship Enterprise or the Serenity or the Millennium Falcon. These are all good examples of essentially mobile lairs.
Yeah, I mean, like a Pirates game, the pirate ship would be a good example of, a lair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and a different thing that's interesting too is sometimes it might not even be a specific place. I just got done rereading Tarzan, like the old Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Okay.
Tarzan of the Jungle. What's interesting there is like there's no real attention given to Tarzan's home.
It's the jungle.
Tarzan's home is the jungle. That's right.
It's interesting because you bring that up. Hell's Kitchen is, for Daredevil, that's kind of like his lair in a sense. It's that's his place.
Yeah, it's definitely his territory. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is when I think about this, I think there's ways in which a region could count as a lair or a domain could count as a lair. If it gives you the kind of resources and security that a lair would give you, either because it's remote or because it's so dangerous that only this character like Tarzan could function in the jungle,
It's interesting food for thought. I was thinking about like some interesting kind of lairs I remember. I always think of like the X-Files, Mulder's little, like, hear me out. Like he had that little basement at the FBI.
I want to believe that's a lair.
Kind of. It was, but it told you a lot about the character.
Yeah.
And when you first meet him, he's in this basement and he's got this poster on the wall that says like, I want to believe. And he's relegated to the worst office you could imagine in the building.
That's right.
Like they wanted to disappear him into the basement.
He's out as far away as they can legally put him without having him outside the building.
But they had a lot of conversations and stuff that happened in that little room. So it felt like this was the place they kind of went back to discuss the evidence.
Where he goes to think. It's where his files are.
His X
files, you might say.
X-Files. But
That's right.
anyway, so lairs.
Yeah, so I think what's interesting about that is that size doesn't necessarily matter. But you kind of made a nice point when we were talking about this earlier. You said, what matters is what happens if this thing is stolen or destroyed. And there were a few times in the X-Files where Mulder's office got ransacked or files were taken out of it, and you really felt that loss. So a good lair is one where there's something really at stake for the characters in that. And consequently then for the players, that's something where they want to maintain and secure and so forth. There's another kind of thing here that's interesting too, is that I saw an interesting note. Matt Colville has a book, MCDM Productions. They have one called, I believe, Kingdoms and Followers. And there's a lot of interesting thinking in there. I'd recommend people read it. But one thing he says that I thought was interesting is he doesn't think people really kind of own a base until they've had to defend it. So when he has players and characters, they get their lair set up, he thinks they don't really kind of own it, or they don't count as being kind of the masters of that place until somebody's come and attack them and they've fended off that attack. And I think that's an interesting point of
What
view,
about if in the process of getting that lair, they attacked it or they earned it that way? I guess I could see that case as well.
Yeah. I think the idea would be if you fight for it, it means you're not going to walk away from it.
True. That's that probably just an idea of a great lair in a game.
Yeah.
The story would evolve in that kind of capacity to where, if that lair was attacked, they would be up in arms. It would be a great rallying point for the game. So, how would one get a lair in a game?
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is I don't think a lair is something I want to give to first level players as soon as they've started. Don't get me wrong. There's exceptions for everything, and you could have certain kinds of cases. Like if you're playing a Star Trek game, you're going to start with a ship, and that's going to be your lair. Okay.
It doesn't have to be, though, the ship you're going to end with.
Right.
It could be the one that gets you to the ship that you want to end up with. Like I'm sure Han Solo didn't start with the Millennium Falcon, right?
No, yeah, at least not according to the Solo movie.
Yeah, which was great, by the way.
It's underrated. Yeah.
Yes.
I would say this. It should be an achievement, to your point, right?
Yeah.
A lair should be a place that you've done some adventuring.
Even if it's not a big achievement, there should be a good story behind it.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of connects to what we were saying earlier. If you remember our episode on items, items shouldn't be things that are just interchangeable collections of stats. They should be things that have a little bit of lore around them, and therefore they're a little bit stickier. People should get sentimentally attached.
100%, Ben.
So your lair should be like that too. Your lair could be like, this was my father's ancestral castle, or this was to the Millennium Falcon. This was the ship I won in a gambling opportunity and then set a record with, so there could be all kinds of stuff. But yeah, that's the key idea, right? It could come in a lot of different ways, but I would say, generally speaking, don't give it out off the bat, and don't give it out just sort of willy-nilly without attaching some good story to it.
So you got your lair. We're going to be using that lair, right? We're going to be using that lair to open up story opportunities and character growth opportunities as as we now have this asset that is, part of the story. So how are we going to be using this as a GM?
Yeah. So I think there's some really interesting stuff there. One is think about how player functional it is. We talked a moment ago about letting players have capabilities being augmented there. Maybe they can use it to make money. The Millennium Falcon is a cargo freighter. You can imagine characters having in a superhero game, let's say having a lab, or in a fantasy game, maybe their castle really has a surrounding village around it, and it's an economic center.
Well, also like a big part of a lot of these games that we play is crafting. You know,
Yeah.
I ran a D&D game where we had a lot of crafters, and I needed to give them a place where they could, build those items that would go down into Legacy.
Right. Smithies and arcane libraries and so forth.
Exactly.
Well, and then also that's just what the players are doing with it. But you asked the question, what is the GM doing with it? And so,
Yeah.
What's fun about this kind of stuff is these things always come with history. Who
Yeah.
owned this thing before you did? Whether it's, again, a kind of a site or whether it's a vehicle or something else. Do they want it back? What if you go and you're given this deed to the castle at such and such place, and it's on the periphery of this, the king's kingdom or whatever, and you go out there and you find there's already somebody there who says it's theirs. what do you do at that point? Are you going to fight for that, or what's going to happen?
Heck yeah, you are.
That's right.
No, yeah, you're right. There's all sorts of lore and story involved with this, and that lore and story could be part of the overall campaign. It could really add richness to this, the campaign storyline. So
one of the things I like too is even letting the lair be something where there's secrets to unlock. Like, what if there's a dungeon you can't get into, or a vault that you found when you got there, or what if all of a sudden on this ship you found a secret information chip that you didn't know was there, or you found other modifications that maybe weren't obvious until you hit the hyperspace drive or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it could end up like Al Capone's vault.
Right.
For those who are old enough to remember that news story, but where
oh no, do tell about that one. That's actually kind of fun.
They had back in the early 80s,
like somewhere in the mid 80s, I think it was Geraldo Rivera.
Geraldo Rivera, that's right. He found one of the old Capone's vault, and they decided they're going to do a big special on it.
Yeah,
the whole they were going to block off a Friday night, 8 o'clock. They were going to crack open this thing, and it was all talking about what could be inside it, and it was empty.
It was that's right.
Prime time, they cracked this thing open, and there was nothing in there.
The lights are probing with their high-powered broadcast camera lights into this
Geraldo
dark,
Rivera looked like
empty space.
He looked like just a moron.
He was so disappointed. There's a little part of me that felt bad for him, but at the same time, like,
he was disappointed. Everybody who watched that show was disappointed. But Don't let that happen to your lair.
Yeah, you're the GM. You can put stuff in there. Don't do that to your players.
Yeah, don't do that to your players. Also, with your lair comes like upkeep, and there could be potential problems with the upkeep, or what kind of like weaknesses your lair might have. These are all things you got to think about. Like think of them as like characters in a sense.
Yeah,
they have strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yeah, what's interesting is when we talked before about a lair being something you can improve, implicitly that means that it's something that's not perfect now. And so here's some examples you can imagine, right? Of course, there's the famous sort of examples of like the Millennium Falcon pooping out of hyperspace, not being able to sort of make the jump. Mm-hmm. But like, so for example, in a fantasy setting, you could imagine a castle maybe that's got a honeycomb network of caves and catacombs beneath it that make it a little bit more susceptible to attack or people sneaking in and out of the walls.
Or it could just be confusing, like Castle Grayskull. Every time He-Man would run through it, he'd stop at a corridor and be like, which way am I going? He's so like, you got to think about the strengths and weaknesses of this lair. And those are kind of fun things to play with when you utilize them in certain ways.
Yeah, it opens up interesting story options, and certainly it gives the players something to address as they continue to develop that lair. Okay, so we've got kind of a grab bag of other stuff here, though, kind of a list of things to consider when you're thinking about how lairs are going to be used. So in no special order, maybe one thing to start with here would be think about how lairs are going to function very differently in very kind of narrative or plot focused games versus very like sandbox exploratory games. And an example would be, when you and I played in a kind of a long running game, we got a lair, I think somewhere on 5th level. This is our.
You got a plot of land. I think you got a plot of land to which to build a lair, and you guys started developing that.
Right. A lot of our adventures, though, took us away from that place, and we kind of came back to it at points, but it was never kind of the place where we would go every day. Mm-hmm. So what's interesting there is that, when you're thinking about a very narrative-driven game, think about what role the lair is going to play, how often players are going to be there. how much work you're going to give the players to do to maintain or set up this lair. And then think about that as in contrast to like a sandbox game where the players really are free to stick around. Then they can stay there or they can go. They can improve it in whatever they want. They can become benevolent local lords, or they could become maleficent. What would be the right word? Or they can become benevolent local lords, or they can become malevolent local dictators. So,
well, that's a dead. Say that 10 times fast.
I don't want to. At any rate, the point is, in a sandbox game, it's going to function very differently from a narrative game. So that's one thing to think about.
Also, like think about like how is this serving my players? How is it serving my game? So think about that. Like I mentioned to you, Ben, that like I had a game with a lot of crafters in it, and I needed a lair that served the purpose of that crafting. Obviously, we were playing the game. We were on the road a lot. We didn't have a lot of time to craft, and that was a distraction for a lot of the game. So we had this lair that like they would visit in their dreams, like in their dream state.
Oh, that's interesting.
Where they would craft, at this lair while they're in their dream state. This was just, it seems it's a little hokey, but it was a way to kind of like allow them to craft.
I was going to say that sounds like cheating. That's almost like Severance. That's like, I've got my dream any that's going to do work while I'm asleep.
But we just wanted the players just wanted to craft. They wanted the time to craft, but they also were like, I want to get on the road. How can I have my cake and eat it too? And
yeah, you're a very generous GM for letting them do both of those things.
Yeah. So just think about the function of the lair. How does it enhance the story? You had a great lair that was in one of the books, I believe, Troll Skull Manor.
Yeah. So when you play the Waterdeep Dragon Heist module, one of the things you can do early in that game, this breaks that rule of not giving people a lair too early. But this one, it's interesting because when you start the game, you essentially get a deed to this inn, and it's kind of wrecked. Like you got to put a lot of money into it to get it fixed up. And so
it is. I cribbed that idea, by the way. I
good.
loved it.
How'd it go?
I loved the idea of Troll Skull Manor. I thought it was fantastic, but I introduced it with characters when they were around level 5. They had earned a deed to this manor, and at this point they had some money to kind of like decide what they wanted to do with it, and it kind of they enjoyed it. They enjoyed it a lot, but I think it had a lot of personality to it.
Do you feel like getting it at level 5 at that point felt different and sort of hit different than
it did
when we got it early in the game in the published module?
Yeah, I think it did hit differently, and I think it was more. I think they enjoyed it more because, when you're at those early levels, every dollar you have, you're like, I need to upgrade my armor, I need to get a new weapon, or yada yada yada. They were kind of at the point where like, I've bought those things. Now I want to spend some money on something else.
Yeah.
And that felt like a good time to bring that in. Plus they wanted to like explore and have this game around the city. So this was a kind of a way to kind of like explore that city and be a part of it.
Well, to that earlier point about the Bat Cave, right? This did fix them in that city, gave them a place in that city and so forth.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, some other things to think about when you're thinking about lairs. One thing to think about, this is sort of connected to that point about where people are located, right? Is how accessible is this during gameplay? One of the things you'll see, for example, in a superhero game, right? The Dr. Bad Guy who has the volcanic island base somewhere out in the South Pacific. Well, he better have some really amazing transportation if he's going to menace the city from time to time. If he's hanging around the city or, he's going to have a hard time getting back there. So think about how the function of that lair is going to vary or needs to be different depending on how accessible it is too.
Yeah. Think about that poor contractor, man. Like I got this gig.
Materials out there.
I got this gig. I'm going to be building this lair in a volcano.
Yeah.
We lost a few guys today.
That's you had to reset the OSHA little sign, 0 days since accidents.
Folks, don't let those things dissuade your dreams of awesome
having your own
awesome
volcano
lairs. So
a couple other quick thoughts here, right? Number one, think about what the surrounding area is like. Are you in a lair that is in open terrain and everybody knows where it is? Are you in a lair that is, an example of that would be like the Hall of Justice, You know, think about the difference between that and, let's say, Punisher's hideout or the Batcave.
Oh, I was just thinking I'd go with the Legion of Doom. They're
well, they're in the swamp too.
Did that rise out of a swamp? Like,
yeah. Is this a secret base, or is it a place where everybody kind of knows where it is? I mean, that's going to have very different impacts on the kind of influence you have.
Yeah.
And then finally, think about the genre considerations. Think about how bases function differently in different genres. So in a sci-fi game, for example, when we talked about Firefly or Star Wars or Star Trek, vehicle bases are probably pretty common. Here's a different example. In a post-apocalyptic game, right? Bases are typically these scavenged things, these maybe they're caves or pre-cataclysm vaults or whatever it might be, right? But they might be very impermanent. They might be very unreliable. Think about how you can use the genre to help you bring that base to life.
Yeah, those bases should become a character unto themselves. Did you ever play the Mass Effect series, Ben?
Yeah, I played the first one. I sadly have not pursued the second and third.
Yeah.
So
there's a part in those games. Spoiler alert! You should play it anyway, so I'm going to break it. The ship gets like taken. You know? And there's a whole like part where you're trying to escape. And one of the fun things about it is that you kind of know the ship, so the character is kind of like using the little tunnels that the other people don't know to kind of escape out. It's a neat thing, and those are kind of things you can do with your lair. Keep in mind, it's the home field advantage, folks. And so when you have those things that happen to you, this is your home. You're going to fight for it.
That's right. All right, Mark, today's tune-up segment is a little different from some of our usual ones. I really like this one. Help us tune up our snacks. What are good snacks to bring into your game situation? How does food work at the table, Mark?
It works I love snacks.
Who doesn't love snacks?
I love snacks. No, snacks are great, but like there are definitely some snacks that you don't want at your table. They're messy.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. As a GM, you're kind of the host, and so maybe snacks are something that you provide. However, that said, because you're GMing, there's also a tradition of players providing snacks because they're not doing the GMing. They're kind of contributing something. Of course, there's also a sort of little tradition within that tradition of using snacks to bribe the GM. As GMs, we are open to this kind of thing.
Yeah. There are definitely awards to be given for best snacks.
That's right. Let's talk about what makes good snacks or bad snacks. Just off the top, Mark, what are some of your favorite snacks to have?
Oh man, I love Sour Patch Kids. Mm-hmm. I'm all down with that. The classics, Doritos, all that kind of good stuff. But there's problems with Doritos, right?
Yeah,
it's that
Doritos
powder, man.
Give you that cheese dust.
Yeah. So
Cheetos, God help you if you got Cheetos. It's the same kind of thing, but worse.
Here's the hack for Cheetos, guys. Just get some chopsticks.
Yeah.
You got a bowl, you got chopsticks. Don't worry about it. We got you covered here.
So the theme here, though, right? Messy snacks are bad. That's going to get all kinds of mess on your stuff. Relatively clean finger food. I tend to use a lot of like peanuts, M&Ms. Those kinds of things are pretty good fodder at my table usually. One thing I'll say too is I don't tend to do big meals during a game. Like there's that kind of classic, let's order pizza and play some RPGs and stuff. If you start your RPG before the pizza's arrived, I don't care what you're doing. As soon as that doorbell rings and the delivery shows up,
that game is derailed.
Everybody's doing something else. Yeah, no engagement. You could be at the middle of the combat where you're finally dealing with Dr. Bad Guy and it doesn't matter. Pizza's here.
Yeah. A lot of this also, folks, is predicated on like what's the quality of your table? Do you really want that stuff if you got a really nice table? You got this expensive wormwood, $4,000 awesome table.
I'm going to protect that
I'll tell
investment.
you what, they're drinking out of sippy cups, man. Nobody's
That's right. That's right. Yeah, when I was a kid, we were playing on like one of those fold-up tables in a unfinished basement. I was like, bring it all down,
Bring it all down.
These days, as somebody who's actually invested a little bit of money in a nice gaming table, I'm like, nope, it's finger food. It's easy stuff. It's No drinks on the table.
Also, folks, like I like to have the snacks to the side, on the table to the side. They can
Mhm.
grab, maybe a bowl, bring it over to the table and eat. But like, I don't like the bags out in the middle of the table where you got your figurines,
Yeah.
you got your drinks. I don't like all that. Like, it's a recipe for disaster. The sound of the bag crinkling drives me nuts.
I think this is going to be the tune-up segment where we officially out ourselves as old. I think we've done that before, but
Is that it?
I think this is what this is.
I
Hey,
don't
I
know.
will say this though. One of the cool opportunities, one of the great things that some creative players will do is they'll bring themed food, to
Oh,
the thing.
wonderful.
Cookies or maybe different kinds of dishes that might be appropriate. Like if you're playing like a Lord of the Rings game and somebody brings their own home cooked version of Lembas, that
God
person
bless
gets
them.
immediate inspiration or bonuses.
Yeah, that's awesome. But yeah, just be cognizant of the mess, like nachos and you know all
Yeah.
these oily, cheesy stuff. Just make sure you got your napkins.
Something else I'll say too, be cognizant of who all is available or ready to be able to do that. I had a friend, for example, who having a hard time with some of his money. And so he wasn't, this is in grad school in
I
Roll
feel
4.
called out.
There was, what it was, we ordered pizza one night and he goes, well, I'm not going to order pizza. But of course, when it got there and he's looking at everybody with these big cheesy slices, he just broke down. And we're like, that's fine, you can have it. But we shouldn't have put him in that position in the first place.
Yeah, know your group. Also, there's people who have gluten restrictions or something like that. Be thoughtful, but have snacks is as much of a part of the game as anything, right? Like
Right.
we want to have our snacks there. Just check with your host.
How do you feel about people bringing vegetable trays?
God, I love it, man.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I mean, the betrayal of the social compact, man.
Yeah, the carrots are noisy as hell. but you know what? It's the ranch. You just dip it. It's
Wow.
I'm a Minnesotan. We could drink ranch out here.
All right. Well, you guys, I think that is as much, probably more than we should say about snacks at the table. We hope you've got some good snacks lined up for your next game. We'll have another episode of Tabletop Tune-Up ready for you in a couple more weeks. Until then, keep those dice rolling.
Tune up, level up your fun. Tune up, your quest has now begun. Tune up, we'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up. Tune up, level up your fun. Tune up, your quest has now begun. Tune up, we'll show you how it's done. Tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up, tune up. Come get your tune up. It's time for your tune up. Your game needs a tune up. Come get your tune up. It's time for your tune up.